in the Times today saying, if they were in any doubt, ask one of the policemen in Downing Street, ask Larry the cat. He would have told you stay and pay your respects. I mean, on every level, this was wrong and potentially a game changer in terms of the election.
Kirsty, first of all, on that question of what we learned last night, what we saw last night, and I suppose there are two things here. There's the kind of personalities of these people as representatives, yes, of Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems, SNP, Greens, Reform UK. Also on policy, what have we come away with as a result of the seven-way debate?
What did I learn from last night? I learned that Angela Rayner gives amazing side eye. I learned, actually, the only new fact that I learned from the entire 90 minutes was that Nigel Farage wants proportional representation, which is another strike against PR for me. And I learned that I want to be Michelle Hussein when I grow up. I think that's the sum total of it. The other thing I learned was that seven-way debates on politics are probably no way for sane people to spend their Friday nights. It reminds me of the line from Macbeth, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. It wasn't much of a dial shifter. All the things you'd expect. The smaller parties ganged up on Labour and the Conservatives. Angela Rayner and Penny Mordaunt went at it hammer and tongs and shouted over each other, and everyone seemed. It's a Friday night, people. We've all had a hard week at work. It was very shouty.
Yeah, it was quite
shouting
shouty.
at each other, shouting at the audience. And mainly it was just a set of talking points that I feel that they could have just delivered on social media and spared us all 90 minutes of, not pain, but it wasn't exactly enlightening, was it?
Well, that's interesting. So, John, come in on this then. In terms of the format, I mean, it's not easy to corral seven, let's be real, big egos, big political personalities who are trying to convey a message in an election campaign. So how do you assess the success or otherwise of last night's debate?
So I, if I'm honest, rather sort of echo what Kirsty said, and I'm not a fan of multi-headed debates. And last night we had a seven-way debate. I think since the debates were first brokered, both by the political parties and the rival broadcasters in the spring of 2010 now, so 14 years ago, there's been a, if you like, mission creep, significant mission creep. If you cast your minds back to the deal that was struck 14 years ago, there were going to be three debates, and then they were going on different topics. So we had in 2010, April 2010, a 90-minute debate on the economy, a 90-minute debate on Home Affairs, a 90-minute debate on Foreign Affairs. And the debate was conducted by only three party leaders, Nick Clegg, David Cameron and Gordon Brown. And they were far less shouty events and much more light rather than the heat was generated. So I think there's been mission creep. And I'm in favour of a commission that takes the discussion and the coordination and the arguments away from both the political parties and from the rivalous broadcasters. A commission is set up in advance of the election, so it's all sorted out months before an election is called. You might have a very senior former judge, a very senior former politician, a very senior former media executive, and they corral and coordinate the debate and set the rules. Whereas what we did have last night, and as Kirsty said, it was a bit like that line from Macbeth. So I feel there's been mission creep, and I'm quite tempted now. It depends how the debates go. Sky's holding one on Wednesday with a very different format in Grimsby, where there'll be a set piece interview followed by questions and answers to the two individual leaders. I think I'm quite tempted to sort of reinvigorate the idea of a commission, because I felt last night's debate didn't necessarily take us that far. However, having said that, I thought that we did get the arc, if you like, the arc of political views across the UK. And I did enjoy hearing from the representative of Plaid Cymru, from the representative of the Green Party, which I wouldn't necessarily normally beam into.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it, Kirsty? Because there is something of a spotlight then put on these parties. And if we consider the topics that came up last night, the military and defence, clearly the D-Day commemoration faux pas as well, the NHS, immigration, the economy kind of more broadly, and the cost of living, tax was in there too. And so it definitely does give a platform to these smaller parties.
Yes, it does give a platform to these smaller parties, but like I said, you can stick their talking points up on social media and give us all our 90 minutes back. I think for me, there is no substitute for a long, deep forensic interview with a really good journalist. I mean, I would like to watch an hour of Andrew Neil putting the leaders through their paces. That is something that I would definitely want to watch, and I would definitely learn something from. I think this is just a kind of rattle through of talking points, and I learned one new fact last night. One.
Yeah, and that's a difficulty, actually. That is a difficulty. Kirsty, just on D-Day as well, in terms of what this is doing to shape the campaign, we've talked before on this programme about trying to avoid, we have Kirsty's rules of campaigning and trying to avoid issues. I mean, this one doesn't need a rule, does it? You go to D-Day and you stick it out for the full commemorative day.
I think this is what you could put in the category of it's a no-brainer. There's a wonderful piece from Matthew Parris in the Times today saying, if they were in any doubt, ask one of the policemen in Downing Street, ask Larry the cat. He would have told you stay and pay your respects. I mean, on every level, this was wrong and potentially a game changer in terms of the election. It's the sort of, it's not a gaffe. It's the sort of historic blunder, if you like, that will be talked about for years afterwards, I suspect. And the issue with it is, and bear in mind that we'd already seen an uptick in support for reform when Nigel Farage entered the fray. This is going to drive the very people that Conservatives are trying to hold on to into the arms of reform. And because the Conservatives hold on to so many marginal seats, it doesn't take much of an uptick in reform's base to hand, a lot more of those Conservative seats over to Labour or Liberal Democrats. At Stonehaven, where I work, we do our own MRP polling. This was before the D-Day blunder. We'd seen, a 3% upswing in support for reform because of Nigel Farage's entry into the contest. That has cost, in 1 week alone, and that's before the blunder, that cost the Conservatives 54 seats. So those ultra marginals that they're trying to defend, that is the critical problem here. It's a small swing away from the Tories, but it has a major impact on their seats.
And John, just to come back to you on the kind of debates on the smaller parties and building in what Kirsty's been saying there about the swings, over the last sort of 14 years or so, in terms of the debates that we've seen around elections, would you say that they are important? You're talking about a commission, so you clearly see a value in having these set-piece events. Do you think they do change people's minds? Are they important for informing an electorate?
I'm not sure they. Sorry to interrupt. I'm not sure they change people's minds, but they do, if you like, sort of aerate the issue. And remember, the debates happen in prime time. And yes, it's a Friday night, and people might want to be doing something else after a tough week. But it is in prime time television. And a lot of politics happens, if you like, in the sidelines of the broadcast schedule. And just to take a little bit of issue with what Kirsty said about political leaders and sit-down interviews, absolutely. But the main politicians over the last 10 years or so have run away from doing them. They do not want to be forensically interviewed live on television. They shy away from it now. Particular exponent of that was Boris Johnson. The debates happen in prime time. They do aerate the issues, and I think they are a good thing for democracy.
Kirsty?
Well, I think if people shy away from the interviews like Boris Johnson did, and John's right about that, it tells you everything you'd need to know. I mean, if the Labour leader steps up and wants to be interviewed for an hour by Andrew Neil and the Conservative leader doesn't, then voters can draw their own conclusion from that, can't they? And if you don't want if you haven't got the courage of your own convictions to allow yourself to be exposed to the sort of forensic interviewing that Andrew Neil is famed for, then you probably shouldn't be asking people to vote for you to be the Prime Minister.
Both a really interesting discussion. Lots of people getting in touch in response to what you've been saying. Let's speak again soon, but thank you for now. Kirsty Buchanan, their former special advisor to Theresa May, and John Riley, former head of Sky News. I'm going to return to a point I made post that summer Conservative leader election, in which it was Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt, and Liz Truss eventually won. We all know what happened after that, but Liz Truss won. And one of the points that I remember making at the time that I'm going to stick to is that actually going for these interviews, opening yourself up as a politician to a forensic interview and to examination is good for, absolutely, it's good for the electorate, of course it is, but it's also good for the politicians because it lets them examine and scrutinise their own policies. Accountability is good. One of my arguments was if Liz Truss's economic plans, which weren't fully fleshed out during that summer when we were interviewing representatives from the campaign, if they had been fully available for scrutiny, would we have ended up in the situation in which we did? I just wonder if politicians should acknowledge that actually an examination by the likes of Times Radio's Andrew Neil would allow them to take their policies into the light of day and go, hang on, maybe I need to think about that some more.
Actually, even more than that, on a very basic level, we spoke yesterday to a KC who is a former world debating champion, and he said one of the key things you have to do is be authentic.
Yeah.
People want authenticity. If you sit down for an hour with Andrew Neil and have a chat, you can show your human side. We've had messages. We always get messages. Why don't politicians answer the questions? I wish they could be honest. I wish they could be authentic. You would be able to, within an hour, get your political message across without having to say it 27 times. You could sit there and just be really, you're not worried about being interrupted. You can just say it. But you could also show your human side. You could maybe smile. You could, you could become someone that people can relate to.
Yeah.
And that, would be welcome, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.